5 wealthy elites had gathered in a mansion deep in the mountains for a private meal. This single dinner alone cost over £1 million, and the ingredients they were eating were enough to leave anyone speechless. Soon, the fresh ingredients were brought out to the tycoon's table. The springy thigh meat had been sliced into small pieces and pan-fried medium rare. The chest ribs had been brushed with sauce and slow-roasted repeatedly over imported North American cherrywood. The tongue had been prepared as sashimi. Just as the guests were savoring every bite, the police suddenly arrived. Faced with this unexpected turn, Laura could only smile and invite them inside. The officers had come looking for a young man from the town who had gone missing. As they spoke, they handed over a photo. To everyone's horror, the boy in the photo was the very ingredient being served to tonight's guests. Even though the visitors clearly meant business, Laura, accustomed to handling tense situations, kept her composure. But the sheriff's next words instantly broke a cold sweat down her back.
Jose is my nephew. He is a responsible and proud new father. And today was his daughter's baptism.
With connections this powerful on display, Laura had no choice but to lead them into the kitchen. The sheriff happened to spot Nick preparing the dishes. After a brief round of questions, he pulled out a photo of his nephew. The moment Nick saw the photo, he forced down the wave of nausea rising in his chest and claimed he'd never seen the boy. The sheriff, finding nothing, was suddenly drawn in by the aroma in the air. The 2 officers said they had never smelled such a fragrant broth in their lives.
What kind of meat do you use for the pozole?
It's a mixture.
We're looking into modified wood.
And there's chicken stock, that always helps.
It was clear the officers weren't ready to leave just yet. So Laura asked if the 2 had eaten anything and instructed Nick to bring them a bowl of the soup. The 2 of them dug in eagerly, lavishing praise on the dish. After eating, the sheriff told Laura that every so often, a few young people from the town would simply vanish. The village elders all assumed they had gone off to seek their fortunes elsewhere. But once they left, there was never another word. The sheriff was convinced it couldn't be that simple, especially since this time, his own nephew was involved. He then walked over to the dinner table, pulled out the photo, and asked the guests if any of them had seen the boy. Even though they already knew the boy was tonight's ingredient, they remained perfectly calm. After all, this wasn't their first such meal. They told him they had only come here to enjoy a quiet dinner. They had never seen the boy in the photo. Getting nowhere with his questioning, the officer was about to leave, when suddenly, the tycoon seated at the head of the table called out to stop him.
Our expectation is high that this will be an outstanding meal.
The sheriff, who had just tasted the soup, had clearly developed a strong interest in the food. Seeing this, Laura pulled the tycoon aside privately. But before she could even begin scolding him, the tycoon posed her a question.
Are you married?
No, I'm not.
I've been married for 22 years.
He used his own marriage as a metaphor to explain why he had invited the sheriff to dine. The implication was clear. Having loved ones unknowingly consume their own kin would make this dinner all the more thrilling. At that very moment, a woman named Lisa came looking for them. She claimed to be a friend of Jason's. To keep her from disrupting the dinner, Laura made up an excuse to send her away. But Lisa said she'd driven all the way from somewhere far. Surely she could at least use the bathroom before leaving. So Laura brought her to Nick and told him to get rid of her as quickly as possible. Nick was stunned to see Lisa, but Lisa was even more confused. Why had the woman just called him Jason? Nick told her he was filling in for Jason on this job. He'd explain everything in detail later. Hungry, Lisa grabbed a piece of meat from a serving tray and popped it in her mouth. Nick immediately snatched the tray away, because only he knew what that meat was actually made of. Meanwhile, as dish after dish was brought out, the guests heaped praise on Nick's culinary skills. There was still one dessert left to serve. Then one of the women accidentally let something slip.
The tongue?
A tongue of what?
Nick had to quickly lie and claim it was pig's tongue, but the sheriff said the meat didn't really taste like pork. Thankfully, the tycoon at the head of the table stepped in to smooth over the awkwardness. Once outside, Nick was drenched in cold sweat. It was right then that he spotted Lisa, who still hadn't left. But he didn't have time to deal with her now. There was still one dish left to prepare. When Nick pulled the tongue from the fridge, he discovered a fatal problem. He hadn't noticed it before. It was covered in herpes sores.